She married a dying stranger for his last wish. Woke up as vampire queen with a 1,000-year contract. The storm had come without warning. Thunder rolled over the mountains like the roar of ancient beasts, and the rain fell in jagged sheets, cutting through the night. In the small village of Ravendale, torches flickered against the wind, casting long, trembling shadows on the wet cobblestones. It was in this chaos that Alara moved, her cloak pulled tightly around her, protecting her from the biting cold. She had grown used to loss. Orphaned at a young age, she had learned to survive on her own, working at the local inn, tending to travelers and villagers alike. Yet, despite the hardships, her heart had remained gentle, and her eyes carried a light that many said could soothe the darkest soul. That night, as the storm raged, a stranger appeared at the inn's door. He was pale, almost ghostly, and his clothes were soaked and torn. He carried himself with a strange grace, but there was a heaviness in his eyes, a weight of despair that immediately drew Alara's attention. "Please," he said, his voice soft but commanding, I need someone to marry me. Tonight." Alara's brow furrowed. "Marry you? But why?" The man's gaze fell to the floor. "I am dying. There is only a few hours left for me in this world. There is a wish I must fulfill, and it cannot be done alone." The inn was silent. The villagers looked on with suspicion and fear. Marrying a dying stranger in the middle of a storm sounded like madness, yet there was something in his voice that shook Alara's very soul. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because," he whispered, "you are kind. You do not hesitate when others suffer. And time is slipping away. Will you grant me this last wish?" Alara's heart pounded. She did not know this man. She knew nothing of his life or his past. And yet, there was a pull she could not explain. Some deep instinct, buried under years of fear and loneliness, urged her to say yes. She took a deep breath. "I will do it," she said softly. "I will marry you." The stranger's eyes widened. Relief, gratitude, and something unspoken flickered across his pale face. He bowed his head. "Thank you," he said simply. Preparations were hurried. The inn's small chapel was decorated with hastily hung flowers, and a few villagers were convinced to witness the ceremony. The stranger, who finally revealed his name as Kale, looked both regal and fragile. His hands were ice cold when Alara took them in hers. The ceremony was brief. The priest's voice trembled as he spoke the vows. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that seemed to echo the weight of what was happening inside. Alara felt her heart tighten with unease. There was a mystery here, one she could not yet see. But Kale's gaze was unwavering, and his hands, though cold, felt almost warm against her own. When the final words were spoken, Kale leaned toward her and whispered, "Thank you for giving me this gift." The moment was almost sacred, yet a shadow lingered. Alara could not shake the feeling that something beyond human eyes watched them, waiting. That night, she could not sleep. Thoughts of Kale twisted in her mind. He was dying, or had he been lying? And yet, there was a sadness in him that was real, a sorrow that made her chest ache. Hours passed, and the storm began to wane. She awoke to an eerie silence. The first rays of dawn crept through the chapel's windows, casting a pale light on the wooden floors. And then she noticed Kale was gone. Her heart jumped. "Kale!" she called, her voice trembling. No answer came. The room felt suddenly cold, far colder than it should have been. A strange silver mark burned into the palm of her hand. She drew back in alarm, staring at the delicate symbol, glowing faintly. A whisper echoed in the room, not through the air, but directly in her mind. "You are now bound, Queen of the Night for 1,000 years." Alara staggered back, her knees almost giving way. Her mind spun. Queen? 1,000 years? The words made no sense. She was mortal, human, fragile. How could this be real? Then, as the last light of dawn vanished, the walls of the chapel seemed to dissolve. Darkness surrounded her, heavy and suffocating. A chill ran down her spine as a new reality pressed against her senses. She awoke again, not in her bed, not in the chapel, but in a vast hall, unlike anything she had ever seen. Stone towers spiraled upward into shadowed heights, and endless corridors wound through the castle like veins of darkness. Candles flickered along the walls, but they did not illuminate the shadows that seemed to move on their own. Elara rose, her legs trembling, her eyes wide with disbelief. Where am I?" she whispered. A voice answered, not aloud but inside her mind. "This is your kingdom now, Elara. Your life as it was is gone. You belong here." "You belong to me?" Terror clutched her heart. The air felt thick, heavy with power. She could feel eyes watching her from the darkness. Something ancient, something alive. Footsteps echoed from the shadows. Figures emerged, tall, elegant, yet fearsome. Their eyes glowed faintly red, and their movements were fluid, unnatural. Vampires, she realized with a shiver. Her stomach twisted with fear, yet she could not move. "You are the new queen," one of them said, his voice deep and commanding, "bound to the bloodline of Kale. Your contract is eternal." Alara's mind reeled. Kale? The man she had married. Had he brought her here? What had she agreed to? She wanted to scream, but her voice failed her. One of the vampires stepped closer, bowing. "Do not fear, Queen. Your power will grow. Your enemies will bow. But first, you must awaken to who you truly are." Elara felt a strange stirring inside her. Her body felt different, stronger, sharper. Her senses heightened. The faintest whisper of a heartbeat could be heard from across the hall. The darkness no longer frightened her. It spoke to her, and she felt alive in a way she had never known. She sank to the floor, pressing her hands to the silver mark that burned her skin. The pain was sharp, but it also gave her clarity. She was no longer Elara, the innkeeper. She was Elara, the vampire queen, bound for 1,000 years to a destiny she could not yet understand. Tears filled her eyes, but they were quickly replaced by resolve. She could not let fear rule her. She would find Kale, she would understand this curse, and she would survive, even if it took every ounce of strength she now possessed. As she stood, a shadow moved across the far end of the hall. Her heart skipped a beat. A figure emerged, cloaked in darkness, but familiar. The voice that spoke next was soft, almost tender, yet carried power beyond measure.
"Elara, my time is not yet over."
"Beware the Shadow King." The words struck her like a blade. She barely had time to process them before the figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving her alone with the strange castle, the glowing mark on her hand, and the terrifying realization her life and her heart would never belong to her again. Elara stepped forward, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. She did not know where the corridors would lead. She did not know what dangers waited. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would endure. She would rise. She would become the queen she had been destined to be. And somewhere in the shadows, Kael watched. Alara's eyes opened slowly. The air around her was heavy, thick with a strange energy that made her chest tighten. She no longer lay in the small chapel of Ravendale, nor in her own bed. She was in a vast hall of stone, endless and silent except for the echo of her own heartbeat. Silver torches flickered along the walls, but their light barely touched the darkness. Her hands shook as she looked down. The silver mark burned faintly on her palm, pulsing as if alive. A chill ran through her veins, and a strange strength stirred in her limbs. She could feel the very walls of the castle around her, as if the stones themselves were aware of her presence. What is this place?" she whispered. Her voice sounded small, fragile, yet somehow carried farther than it should. A deep, commanding voice answered, though no one was visible. "This is your kingdom now, Queen Elara. Your life as it was is gone. You belong here, to us, to him, and to the 1,000-year contract you accepted." Elara spun around, searching for the source. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. Tall, graceful, and otherworldly. Their eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight. Vampires, she realized with a shiver. Their movements were fluid, almost predatory, yet they bowed respectfully before her. "Do not fear," one said, his voice calm but powerful. "You are our queen. You have been chosen to carry the legacy of KL, to protect the balance between our world and the mortal realm. Your power will grow, but first you must understand." Ilara's mind reeled. KL. He had brought her here. But why? She felt a mixture of fear, anger, and an unexpected longing. Her chest ached at the thought of him, the dying man who had asked her to marry him. And now she was bound to this castle, these creatures, this destiny. The head of the council, a vampire with silver hair and eyes like molten gold, stepped forward. "You are no ordinary mortal, Ilara," he said. "The blood of Kale flows through this castle, through our lineage. Your contract binds you to him and to this realm. You will rule as queen, but with power comes responsibility. Danger waits in every shadow." Elara's voice trembled as she asked the question that burned in her mind. "Kale. Is he alive, or is he gone?" The council member's expression darkened. "Kale is not as you knew him. His body has been bound by a curse, trapped between life and death. He is not free to move among the living, but his spirit watches, and his will guides this realm." Her heart ached. Trapped. Kale. She remembered the way his eyes had held hers during the wedding, the desperation in his voice. She had married him out of compassion, and now he was gone, yet somehow present, and she was forced into a role she did not understand. A second vampire, younger and lean, with eyes as black as night, stepped forward. "Queen Ilara, you must learn to control your powers. Your body is no longer mortal. You can hear whispers across corridors, sense life in the walls, and move faster than any human could. But your greatest strength will come from your heart, not your claws." Ilara swallowed hard. She did not want to be a queen, not like this. She wanted to be herself, the girl who served drinks at the inn, who smiled at children, who tended to the sick. But that life was gone. Somehow, some force beyond her understanding had ripped it away. The council guided her through the castle, showing her endless corridors, high towers, and halls lined with portraits of Kale's ancestors. Each one seemed to watch her, their eyes filled with expectation and judgment. Ilara realized that this castle was not just stone and torchlight. It was alive, attuned to her emotions, reacting to her every movement. At the end of a long corridor, she came to a chamber filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts. The air was thick with knowledge, history, and power. "This is your study," the silver-haired vampire explained. "Here you will learn about our world, about Kale's legacy, and about the dangers that now threaten the balance." Ilara ran her fingers over the books, feeling a strange connection to the history they contained. The more she touched them, the more memories and knowledge seemed to flow into her mind, not as words, but as feelings, images, and understanding. She was learning, growing, awakening. Yet even as knowledge filled her mind, a shadow lingered at the edges of her thoughts. The words Kale had whispered in the hidden chamber of the chapel haunted her. Beware the Shadow King. Who was he? And why did Kale fear him so much? Her contemplation was interrupted by a sudden chill. A dark figure moved at the edge of the hall, faster than she could see. A hiss echoed through the corridors, and Ilara felt a rush of instinctive fear, but alongside it a strange surge of power rose within her. She focused, and the figure froze, its eyes meeting hers. You cannot scare me," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I am the queen." The shadow recoiled, then vanished into the darkness. Ilara's heart raced, but her confidence grew. She was learning, slowly, painfully, but she was learning to command the strength that now belonged to her. That night she could not sleep, though exhaustion weighed on her. She wandered the halls of the castle, her senses alert. Every whisper of the wind, every shadow along the walls seemed alive. And then she felt it, a presence, distant but familiar, moving through the castle as if it had been waiting for her. "Ilara!" a voice whispered in her mind. It was Kale's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Do not trust all you see. The Shadow King comes, and his power is beyond anything you know. You must be ready." Tears filled her eyes. She wanted to run, to find Kale, to demand answers, but she could not leave the castle. She was bound. The 1,000-year contract was real, and it would not be broken. All she could do was prepare, learn, and survive. The days passed, though in the castle time moved strangely. Ilara learned to control her abilities. She could hear footsteps from miles away, see the faintest pulse of life in the walls, and even sense the emotions of those around her. The council guided her, but they were not kind teachers. They tested her patience, her courage, and her heart. One evening, as the moon rose high over the towers, Ilara stood on a balcony overlooking the forests surrounding the castle. The wind whipped her hair around her face, and the moonlight bathed her in silver. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a glimmer of acceptance. She was queen now, and though the path ahead was dark, she would face it. But even as she stood there, she felt a ripple through the castle, a disturbance in the energy that connected her to the walls, to the vampires, and to Kale. A shadow moved at the edge of the forest, massive and deliberate. The sense of danger was immediate, palpable. "Ilara," Kale's voice whispered again. "The Shadow King tests you. He is coming. You must be ready." Her heart pounded, but this time it was not only fear, it was determination. She would not be a pawn. She would not be frightened. She would rise to the challenge even if it meant standing against a power older than time itself. And as she turned back into the castle, her eyes caught the flicker of movement in the hall. The shadows seemed to bow before her presence, acknowledging her growing strength. She realized, with a shiver of awe, that she was no longer the girl from the village. She was Ilara, vampire queen, bound to a 1,000-year destiny, tied to a man whose motives were as mysterious as the shadows themselves, and destined to confront a darkness unlike any she had known. A distant howl echoed through the forest outside, carrying a warning she could feel in her bones. The Shadow King had begun to stir. Ilara clenched her fists. She would not cower. She would learn. She would fight, and she would claim her place as queen. And perhaps, if fate allowed, she would uncover the truth about Kale, the Shadow King, and the destiny that bound them all together. The night stretched on, long and silent. But Ilara's resolve burned brighter than any torch in the castle. She was awakening, not just to power, but to her purpose, her strength, and the 1,000-year path that lay ahead. Ilara moved through the endless corridors of the castle, each step echoing against the stone walls. The shadows seemed to twist and whisper, alive with secrets she did not yet understand. Her senses were sharper now. She could feel the smallest movements in the air, hear the faintest heartbeat in the walls. The castle itself had become an extension of her, and yet every corner held a warning. The council had called her to the great hall, a vast chamber with vaulted ceilings and pillars carved with the faces of Kale's ancestors. The vampires were gathered there, their eyes glowing faintly in the torchlight, withers with suspicion. Power could inspire loyalty, but also jealousy. Queen Ilara, the silver-haired council leader said, bowing slightly, "The Shadow King grows stronger. His influence spreads into the mortal lands, twisting what should be pure. Villages have disappeared. Travelers vanish. Dark creatures roam freely. You must be ready to confront him." Ilara's chest tightened. She had expected danger, but the enormity of it pressed down on her like a weight she could not lift. "What is he?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. He is an ancient vampire, the council explained. Older than Kale. He desires the throne and he seeks to destroy all who stand in his way. Your power is new but potent. The first test is upon you.
Elara's stomach twisted.
She had trained, she had learned, yet nothing could prepare her for facing a being older than time itself. That night she wandered the castle's balcony, gazing at the forests below. Moonlight reflected on the mist that crept among the trees. She felt a presence, a flicker of movement so fast she could barely perceive it. Her heart raced. Elara, a familiar voice whispered in her mind. Kale, do not fight alone. Trust your instincts, trust yourself, and trust me, even from afar. Tears welled in her eyes. His voice was close and distant at once, filled with longing and regret. Kale, why did you leave me? She whispered. You are stronger than you know, he replied softly. I could not intervene, not until you were ready. The Shadow King tests not just your power, but your courage. Before she could respond, a chill ran through her. Shadows gathered in the courtyard below, twisting and writhing like living smoke. The first wave of the Shadow King's minions had arrived, dark creatures, faster than any mortal, with eyes glowing red like embers. Elara's heart pounded, but she did not flee. Instead, she focused, reaching into the power flowing through her veins. The castle responded. The shadows around her twisted into barriers, protecting the gates and reinforcing the walls. She could feel her strength, her command over the darkness and the light, flowing together. The creatures shrieked and surged forward. Elara's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. You will not pass! The minions faltered, then recoiled as if struck by an invisible force. The ground beneath them trembled. She felt the thrill of power coursing through her, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was no longer just a girl from the village. She was the vampire queen, bound by 1,000 years of destiny, wielding forces she barely understood. After the first wave was repelled, she retreated into the castle. Her mind raced. The Shadow King was testing her, probing her strength and her will. She needed guidance. She needed Kale. She retreated to the hidden chamber where she had first awakened. The air was thick with magic, and the silver mark on her hand burned bright. She closed her eyes, reaching for Kale's spirit, calling to him with all her heart. Elara. His voice echoed softly in her mind. You are doing well. But the council cannot be fully trusted. Not all of them wish for your success. Some envy you. Some fear you. Beware their whispers. A shiver ran down her spine. Envy among her own council? She had sensed subtle looks, quiet murmurs, but she had dismissed them as habit. Now she realized the danger was closer than she thought. The next morning, the council summoned her to the training grounds. The vampires moved with deadly precision, teaching her combat, control, and strategy. Elara pushed herself harder than ever. Every movement, every strike, every step honed her reflexes. Her body and mind were transforming. She was becoming stronger, faster, sharper. Yet her thoughts returned again and again to Coel. She wanted answers. She wanted him here, standing beside her. But she could not risk calling too loudly. The castle could sense her intentions. Every action had consequences. That night, she dreamed of him. He stood in a misty forest, pale and regal yet distant. Elara, he said, reaching for her. The Shadow King will strike soon. He knows your power grows. You must be ready. She reached out, but her fingers passed through him. She awoke with a start, tears running down her cheeks. The dream had felt so real, so urgent. She could sense the danger creeping closer, its weight pressing on her soul. Days passed and the Shadow King's attacks grew bolder. Villages reported strange disappearances, crops dying overnight, and unnatural storms that swept across the land. Elara realized the attacks were not random. They were meant to test her patience, her judgment, her leadership. During a council meeting, she faced the subtle betrayals Kale had warned her about. Some vampires whispered against her, questioning her judgment, her authority, and even her connection to Kale. Others sought to manipulate her, to bend her will for their own gain. Elara's heart hardened. She realized that to survive she could not rely solely on others. She needed her own strength, her own wisdom. She spoke with clarity and command, silencing the murmurs with words sharp and steady. "You will follow my orders," she said, her voice carrying through the hall like steel. "The Shadow King tests us, and we will not fail." Loyalty is not optional. The council fell silent. Some bowed reluctantly. Others watched her with wary respect. She had asserted her authority, but she knew the true test was yet to come. One evening, as the moon rose high, a messenger arrived from the mortal lands. Breathless and terrified, he spoke of a village destroyed, its people vanished, and the unmistakable mark of the Shadow King left behind. The fear in his eyes mirrored the warning Kale had given her. Elara felt a surge of determination. She would face him. She would protect her people, both mortal and immortal. She would learn the limits of her power and push beyond them. That night, she went to the castle balcony again. The forest stretched endlessly below, shrouded in mist and darkness. The wind carried whispers of danger, of challenge, of fate. She could feel the presence of the Shadow King, immense and menacing, just beyond the trees. "Elara!" Kale's voice came again, gentle but firm. "The first confrontation is near. Trust your instincts. Trust your strength. You are not alone, even if I cannot be there in body." Her hand clenched into a fist. She was ready. She was afraid, yes, but courage had begun to take root in her heart. She would not run. She would not falter. She would face the Shadow King, and she would not fail. Suddenly, a shadow darker than the night itself rose from the forest. The air trembled with power, and the wind howled like a living creature. The Shadow King had arrived. Alara's heart pounded, but she stood tall. The council vampires gathered behind her, their eyes wide with both fear and awe. She lifted her hand, the silver mark glowing bright, and felt the power of the castle flowing into her. The Shadow King's voice echoed, deep and resonant, carrying across the forest. "So, the mortal girl dares to claim the throne. You are bold, little queen. But boldness is not enough." Elara's eyes met the darkness, and for the first time she felt a fierce clarity. "I am not mortal," she said firmly. "I am the vampire queen. You will not take what is mine." A laugh, cold and sharp, cut through the night. "We shall see." The first clash was inevitable. The Shadow King moved like a storm, the very ground trembling under his presence. Elara felt her power rise to meet him, a mixture of fear, rage, and determination. She had trained, she had learned, she had grown, but this was unlike anything she had faced before. Her heart beat faster, yet she felt a strange calm settle over her. She was ready to fight. She was ready to command. She was ready to face the darkness. And somewhere, in the depths of the castle, Kale's spirit watched, unseen, his whispers guiding her, his presence giving her strength. The battle was about to begin, and nothing, neither shadow nor storm, could prepare her for what lay ahead. The forest below the castle shivered under the Shadow King's presence. Darkness spread like a living storm, twisting the trees and filling the air with a heavy, suffocating chill. The villagers and vampires alike had fled or hidden. Only Elara remained, standing at the edge of the balcony, her cloak flaring in the wind, her silver mark glowing bright on her palm. Her heart pounded with fear, but also with determination. This was the moment she had trained for, the moment that would decide not just her fate, but the fate of the mortal and immortal worlds. "Elara," Kael's voice echoed in her mind, soft but firm. "Remember, courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting in spite of it. Trust yourself." She drew a deep breath, letting the wind fill her lungs. Her eyes, now sharp and commanding, scanned the dark forest. The Shadow King's figure loomed, taller than any being she had ever seen, a shadow of power and menace. His eyes glowed like molten lava, burning with centuries of hatred and ambition. "You dare stand against me, little queen!" he bellowed, his voice shaking the forest itself. "Do you think a mortal girl—" "I am not mortal," Alara interrupted, her voice ringing with authority. "I am the vampire queen." "You will not take what is mine." The Shadow King laughed, a sound like cracking ice. "We shall see," he said, stepping forward. The earth trembled beneath him and shadows swirled, forming beasts of smoke and teeth that lunged toward her. Elora raised her hands. The castle responded. Stones shifted, torches flared, and the very walls seemed to stretch outward, forming barriers of silver light and shadow. She could feel the castle's power coursing through her veins, merging with her own. The first wave of dark creatures surged. Elara struck with precision, sending bolts of energy that shimmered like silver fire. Each strike felled the creatures, yet more came. Her strength was growing, but the Shadow King tested her limits. Every moment demanded focus, every breath demanded courage. She moved with speed she had never known, her senses guiding her. She could hear the heartbeat of the forest, the whispers of her counsel, and Kale's voice, always there, always guiding. "Do not falter, Elara. Your power, it is greater than you know," he whispered. Her heart soared. She had doubted herself so often, but now she could feel the truth of his words. The darkness could not touch her, not if she believed in herself. The Shadow King lunged. His hands, long and sharp, aimed to strike her, but Alara's instincts were faster. She met him with a surge of energy, pushing him back. The ground shook as their powers clashed, light and shadow colliding in a storm of magic and force. "You are strong," he growled, "but strength alone will not save you." Elara's mind raced. Strength alone, no. She needed more. She needed strategy, courage, and heart. She remembered Kale's words, the council's teachings, and the power that flowed through her from the castle itself. Her chest tightened, and a new resolve took hold. "I am not alone," she said aloud, her voice carrying through the forest. "I have the castle, my people, and my heart. And you will not win." The Shadow King hesitated just for a moment. That moment was all she needed. She summoned every ounce of her power, letting it flow outward in a surge of light and energy that lit up the forest. Shadows shrieked and twisted, recoiling from her strength. The creatures screamed as the force pushed them back into the darkness from which they had come. But the Shadow King did not fall. He raised his hand, dark energy forming around him like a storm cloud. "You cannot destroy me," he roared. Elora's mind raced. She could fight, she could push him back, but she needed more. She closed her eyes, reaching into her heart, seeking the connection that bound her to Kale. "Elara," his voice was closer now, more tangible. "Together we are unstoppable. Trust in me, as I trust in you." Her eyes snapped open. The castle trembled with energy as a silver light flowed from her mark, reaching outward, seeking him. She felt a warmth in her chest, a connection to Kale that bridged distance, time, and form. Her fear melted, replaced by love, courage, and determination. The Shadow King's strike came, faster than thought, aimed to crush her. Elara met it with her own power, the collision shaking the air. The force was immense, and for a moment, she felt herself falter. But then, Kale's presence surged through her, steadying her, strengthening her. She pushed forward, every strike of her power precise and unstoppable. Light met shadow, and the Shadow King screamed as the force of her heart, her courage, and her growing mastery of power overwhelmed him. Finally, with a surge of silver light, the Shadow King was forced to retreat, vanishing into the dark forest with a final roar of rage. The creatures dispersed, fleeing into the night. Silence fell over the land. Elara's chest heaved. She had done it. She had faced the greatest darkness she had ever known, and survived. She was trembling, but triumphant. She had proven herself, not just to the castle, not just to the council, but to herself. The council approached, their expressions a mix of awe and respect. "Queen Elara, you have surpassed all expectations," said the silver-haired leader. "Your courage and strength, you are truly worthy of your title." Elara's eyes, still glowing faintly from the battle, softened. She looked at her council, at the castle that had become a part of her, and finally allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had accomplished. And then, in the quiet, she felt it, the presence she had longed for. Kale's spirit appeared before her, luminous and calm, a smile touching his pale features. He reached out, and though she could not touch him, she felt a warmth in her chest, a connection that went beyond form or time. "Elara," he said, his voice full of pride and relief. "You have done it. You have risen. You are truly the vampire queen." Tears filled her eyes. "Kael, you have grown beyond what I could have imagined," he interrupted gently. "And now, the future is yours to shape." Elara's heart ached with longing, but also with understanding. She had gained power, courage, and wisdom, but she had also gained clarity. Kale's spirit would always guide her, but she was no longer dependent. She was her own queen. The council watched silently, recognizing the bond, the triumph, and the transformation that had occurred. The castle itself seemed to shimmer, as if acknowledging her victory. "Elara," said one of the younger vampires, bowing deeply, "you have saved us all, and you have proven that even in darkness, light and courage can prevail." She nodded, feeling the weight of the castle, the people, and her destiny settle on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a purpose. She had embraced her power, faced the Shadow King, and survived. She was no longer the frightened girl from Ravendale. She was the vampire queen, bound by 1,000 years, but free in spirit, in heart, and in courage. That night, as she stood upon the highest tower, looking over the moonlit forest and the castle that was now hers, she felt Kale's presence once more. A soft whisper, gentle but strong, brushed against her mind. "Elara, eternity is yours. But remember, even in peace, shadows will linger. You are ready for them, and for every challenge that comes." Her lips curved into a soft, confident smile. "I am ready," she whispered to the night. "I will protect this world, this castle, and everyone in it, and I will honor the bond we share, always." The wind blew, the castle seemed to hum with life, and the stars above sparkled like distant fires of hope. A new era had begun. The vampire queen had risen. The Shadow King had been repelled. And though the future held challenges, dangers, and mysteries, Elara knew she would face them all, with strength, courage, and the heart of a queen. The first light of dawn touched the towers, and for the first time, the world felt still, safe, and full of promise. Kale's presence faded into the soft glow of morning, leaving her with the knowledge that love, courage, and destiny were not separate. They were one. And, as the wind whispered through the castle halls, Elara understood. This was only the beginning of her 1,000-year journey, a journey she would embrace fully, with heart and soul, as vampire queen.